Hello and welcome everyone. This video will be a short introduction to Immanuel Kant's idea of the category and his critique of pure reason, or CPR. Kantian categories are one of the most influential concepts in the history of philosophy, and so we're going to need to contextualize Kant's CPR as a response to the rationalist-empiricist divide to see how Kant's idea of the category is used to merge the two schools of thought into one. I hope to be comprehensive enough so that those with varying degrees of interest in Western philosophy can gain decent, surface-level knowledge about Kant's ideas. I am by no means an expert on this subject, however, so anyone who finds interest in Kant's thought ought to do further research of their own. So without further ado, let's begin. First off, we need to get into the distinction between the rationalists and the empiricists. At the time of his writing, Western philosophy was divided into these opposing schools of thought. Individual thinkers within each school were not united on every issue, but each held three core agreements with one another. The rationalists held that reason and logic are the sources of all knowledge, mathematics is the paradigm of such knowledge, and that one can have genuine, certain knowledge of a priori truths. Empiricists, on the other hand, believe that all knowledge comes from experience and experimentation, full stop. Experimental science is the paradigm of knowledge. Experiment and experience rarely produce certain knowledge, however, in the empiricist school. Kant adapts different ideas from each school of thought. From the rationalists, such as Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz, Kant insists that pure reason yields knowledge with universal and necessary validity. However, he limits this to his transcendental philosophy, knowledge about the conditions of empirical knowledge. There is no a priori universal and necessary knowledge about the content of the world. However, there is transcendental a priori knowledge of the structures of experience. And from the empiricists, such as Locke, Hume, and Berkeley, Kant insists that sensibility is a necessary source of our empirical knowledge. However, Kant rejects Hume's notion that the basic structures of our empirical knowledge, such as causation, are only principles of the association of ideas provided by human nature. So let's get into some of Kant's actual thought. Kant first off wants us to acknowledge that part of our knowledge is actively produced by us. That is, that prior to experience, we supply the forms of intuition and the categories. Now, this active production must go to work on material provided by sensation. Kant names the active faculty understanding and the passive faculty sensibility. Here, we are led to the distinction between appearances and things in themselves. Appearances conform to intuition and the categories, whilst the things in themselves do not conform to such faculties. There are many problems which arise from this distinction, of course, but these do not concern us in this video. Kant goes for a change of perspective as well. We need to change from assuming that our knowledge conforms to things to the assumption that objects conforms to our faculty of knowledge. Here we get into his distinction between pure and empirical knowledge. All of our empirical knowledge begins temporally with sensation, but empirical knowledge is a compound of sensation, passively received, and that which sensation rouses into action. Our understanding is a priori, that being that which is prior to experience. We do have a priori knowledge. A posteriori, on the other hand, is that which is after experience, and as such, never universal and necessary. Everyday life assumes that every change has a cause, but that could never be justified empirically. Another distinction between analytic and synthetic judgments. Analytic judgments with predicate in the subject, such as bachelors or unmarried men. These are tautologies, they bring no new knowledge. Synthetic judgments, on the other hand, predicate but not in the subject. Some bachelors are unhappy. This creates knowledge. This must be justified empirically. Kant thus arrives at the idea of synthetic a priori judgments. These are universal and necessary prior to experience, but they create new knowledge, such as all events have causes. There's no predicate causes in the subject event. Space and time are empirically real, but transcendentally ideal. Empirically real in the sense that from the standpoint of our experience, space and time are real. That is, any possible experience is given within the confines of space and time. Transcendentally ideal, on the other hand, means that we contribute to the temporal ordering, so that we can say nothing about the temporal order of things in themselves. Space and time are nothing when we abstract from the subjective conditions of sensible intuition. Kant defines understanding as faculty of judgment. A judgment is a synthesis, a joining together of different representations into a single representation. It joins a predicate to a subject. For example, the empirical concept lion or the empirical judgment, this is a lion, joins together all the sensations of tan color, roaring, running, killing, and so on and so on. However, an example of a pure concept or a substance. These pure concepts are presupposed in any empirical judgment, such as a lion is an empirical instance of a substance. The pure concepts are called categories. This is how he gets to his transcendental logic, or the study of a priori forms of thought as a structure our experience of objects. Transcendental logic isolates the categories as these forms, or rules of synthesis. Finally, to the categories themselves. The categories are the pure a priori structures of thought. They are the pure concepts of the understanding. Any exercise of the understanding, any empirical judgment with a knowledge claim, must conform to these categories. Categories are rules for the synthesis of representation. Kant stresses that he has systematically generated his list of categories, as opposed to Aristotle's, from the structure of logical judgments, insofar as judgment is the function of understanding. The empirical concept of lion enables us to think an object of intuition as a lion, that is, to unify tan color, large shape, loud roar, big teeth, fast running, antelope killing, etc., under the concept of lion. The pure category of substance, on the other hand, must underlie the empirical judgment, which seems to line up with universal judgments. The categories are the condition for objective judgments. That means a judgment that claims knowledge of an object, and in that way makes a claim that other people can in principle agree or disagree with. No one can agree or disagree with a perceptual judgment. For instance, this rock seems heavy to me, but someone can agree or disagree with the judgment, this rock specifically weighs 52 pounds. You have used the category of substance and accident here as a rule of synthesizing rock in 52 pounds. Thus, in distinguishing his categories, Kant begins from Aristotelian logic and outlining 4 respects in which one can classify any judgment according to its quantity, quality, relation, and modality. So we're going to go down the judgments here from each specific group, and we're going to break down first the judgments, and then we're going to see how they fit into the categories of the understanding. So in terms of quantitative judgments, these are broken into universal judgments, particular judgments, and singular judgments. Universals being of the type that all S is P, particulars of the type that some S is P, and singulars of the type that this S is P. Then we get into qualitative judgments, once again broken into 3 sections. The affirmative, S is P. The negative, S is not P. And the infinite, S is not P or un-P, such as undead rather than not dead. In terms of relational judgments, we get into categorical judgments. All S is P. This involves predication, hypothetical judgments. If S, then P. And disjunctive judgments. S or P are those which set reciprocity. Disjunctive judgments, S or P. Finally, we get modal judgments in terms of problematic judgments, which can be construed in terms of possibility. Assertoric judgments, which are assertive, they have to do with existence or non-existence. And apodetic, which have to do with necessity and contingency. And then we get into the categories as they respond to each judgment. So starting back with quantitative judgments, universal judgments convey unity in terms of their category. Particular judgments have to do with plurality. Singular judgments have to do with totality. In terms of qualitative judgments, we get into affirmative judgments correlating with the category of reality, negative judgments correlating with negation, and infinite judgments correlating with limitation. Here we get into relational categories. Relational judgments are found in the substance-accident category, hypothetical judgments with the cause-effect category, and disjunctive judgments with the reciprocity category or agent-patient. And then finally to modal judgments. Problematic judgments, as I may have mentioned before, deal with possibility versus impossibility. Assertive or assertoric judgments have to do with existence or non-existence. These don't factor possibility or necessity or contingency. They simply make an assertion. Apodetic judgments, on the other hand, have to do with necessity and contingency, and thus are the necessity and contingency category. Every judgment has all 4 characteristics. For instance, the statement Socrates is not a Roman is singular because it has to do with Socrates as a singular subject. Negative in that Socrates is not categorical in that It has to do with all Socrates. Any Socrates is not Roman. And assertoric in that it simply asserts. This has nothing to do with the possibilities or impossibilities of Socrates being Roman, or whether it's necessary or contingent for Socrates to be Roman. So to conclude, Kant's conception of the categories unifies rationalism and empiricism by setting constraints on knowledge that allow for a priori knowledge of the categories whilst maintaining the importance of sense experience. There remains much more to discuss, however this video so far should give a low-resolution introduction to one of the most important philosophical systems in history. Thank you very much for sticking with me through the video, and let me know if you have any questions. Goodbye.